Hello and welcome back to Emperor of the Fading Suns Emperor Wars. I'm your host, Imperialis, and today I am, going to be continuing my tutorial series on the different houses in Emperor Wars mod. So right now I am playing Emperor Wars version 3.4a, which is the latest version. It just came out yesterday, I believe. Um, and I believe that Brian has basically gotten to the point that he's fairly happy with things the way that they are and is not really planning on making any huge, massive changes in the foreseeable future. So hopefully, this will continue to remain relevant for a little while at least. Um, Almost a little bit like trying to do tutorials on a game that's in beta right now, because uh, there's been a lot of updates in the past 2 months or so to the Emperor Wars mod. But anyhow, I'm going to be starting up a new game here, go into historical, and for the first house, I'm going to be taking a bit of a closer look at. I'm going to do a run through with Al Malik here. Largely because they're the house I have the most experience with. They're the one that I've been playing in the current play-by-email game that I've been playing against Brian and some other folks with. And so I feel I'm probably best equipped to um, do the tutorial on them, or at least get the tutorial started with them. There have been some massive changes. I mean, we're playing version 2.8, and this is 3.4. So there's been some big changes, but by and large, I think I've got a pretty good handle on them. So as usual, I'm sure Brian will be in the comments below correcting me and all that sort of stuff. So as far as the game setup goes, I've set everybody else just to AI. I'm going to turn Universal Warehouse off, disable the tutorials, and leave everything else as is. And we'll get started.
House Al Malik.
Okay, so we'll go for him. And call myself Imperialis. Now, figured I'd spend a minute or two talking about the house traits as well. Now, these are things that you can change, but for the purposes of these tutorials, I'm going to leave them as is on the beginner settings. And so for Al Malik, you begin with Enlightened Nobility, which is a very good one. It increases the yield of your research facilities, makes them significantly more useful. Well, they're always useful, but it definitely gives them a healthy boost. Administration, which is almost entirely useless. The vast majority of your income in Emperor Wars mod will not come from tax. It will instead come from the money generating units. So administration is quite useless. But mercantile savvy can be very useful. Um, they get better rates when trading with merchants. And then they've also got a friend in the league that can be useful as well. Their big shortcoming comes in the lack of any of these ancient documentarium traits. So you do not start with any technologies, which hurts. On the flip side, they don't have any negative traits, but the lack of these ancient documentarians, particularly psychosocial engineering, really hampers them in the early game, and especially in the early game rush towards um, the economics and macroeconomics, which are essential. They should be the first. If you watch my first videos, they're the first um, text that you should be rushing for. The other one that's very useful is Battle Master. In the original game, Battle Master was much more of a risk because you only had 5 or possibly 6 noblemen in the entire game. Whereas with the Emperor Wars mod, although in the later versions of it, like the current version that I'm playing now, you cannot build more nobles, but you do still start with significantly more noblemen. And Battle Master gives a very significant armor bonus to an army that they're attached to. The rest of them, I mean, you can kind of take them or leave them. But yeah, so if I were to be power gaming this, I would definitely get rid of administration, pick up Battlemaster, and then probably pick up Decadence, actually. Take the negative trait for taxes, and pick up the Psychosocial Engineering at the very least. Other than that, they're pretty good as far as their traits go. But yeah. So, like I said before, most important tech to start rushing is the Psychosociology. And if you're playing anybody but Al-Malik, you should already start with that unlocked, but since we're Al-Malik, we need to start researching it. And I'm going to dump 2 labs into it. Each lab is currently giving me 89 research points, and Al-Malik begins the game with 3 labs. So I could put my 3rd lab into Psychosociology as well, but the downside to that is I'm wasting a whole bunch of research points, and research points that I could be using for something else. So instead I'm going to put my 3rd lab into Physics, which will get me started going down the tree towards unlocking Superscalar Engineering, which will let me build factories, which are also incredibly important. So I'm going to have my 3rd lab looking at physics. A little hampered because I'm behind the 8 ball here, but okay, I guess Hawkwood and the League went to war right away. That's always interesting. And then resources that I can't build. Okay, so start with a quick overview of House Al-Malik starting position. They have a really big advantage because Criticorum here is 1 jump away from Byzantium 2, which is a significant disadvantage if you don't have it, I guess. House Dakados and Lihalan both have to pass through other people's territory to get to Byzantium 2, whereas Al-Malik, Hawkwood, and Hazat all have direct warp lanes going to Byzantium 2, which is definitely advantageous. However, House Al-Malik pays for this in spades by the fact that their capital of Istkar here borders Stigmata, and another key planet of theirs, Sharput, is also borders Stigmata. And Stigmata, for those of you who don't know anything about the Fading Suns lore, is where these horrible, nasty, for lack of a better word, think of Warhammer 40,000 Tyranids come from. And so no matter how busy you get with the other houses, if you ignore Stigmata, and if you ignore that back door, they will wipe you out. Especially if you are playing with the Nova mod added on, which allows them the symbiotes to build additional units. Really hampers Al-Malik significantly more than the other houses. To help counter this, though, Al-Malik has the most powerful navy out of all the houses. You can see here, orbiting Stigmata, and I'll just click on them as an example. We have 2 of these Tuluar heavy cruisers. They have a ranged space attack of 80 and an armor of 75. Excuse me. That is very potent. They do a lot of damage, and with it being ranged space, they're going to do a lot of damage before other people get a chance to do damage to them. So very, very powerful units, particularly on the defense, because you notice they only have 2 movement points, which means they can only attack twice in a turn, which makes them a little bit weaker on offense, but very potent defense units. So they've got 2 orbiting around Stigmata, and we'll just take a tour of the rest of the fleet here. We have another 4 above Ishtar, none above Aelon, another 1, plus a carrier, and 2 fighters. Well, one's a fighter, the other's a space and ground bomber. Um, Fighters are nice because they're cheap, and you can use them very effectively as a screening unit. And they're also very good for hit and run attacks, because when you make a jump from one system to another, it uses up all your movement points. You aren't able to attack again. However, if they're transported in a carrier, that carrier uses its movement points, but the fighters in it do not. So that means that your fighters can scramble out of the carrier and attack directly the same turn that you jumped, which is very useful. But anyhow, so back to the toolbars. We've got 2 there, 4 there, 1 there, so we're up to 7 so far. And I guess, yeah, it is just a total of 7. I thought they used to have 8, but that might have changed recently. But yeah, so they're very, very well positioned defensively in terms of space, or at least their space component. Other than that, they've just got sort of the standard transports. Hazred Swole Pugs can transport a single unit. Then a big bulk carrier, a smuggler, a lander. No other real surprises there. A little frigate, escort frigate. That's the weakest of the capital ships, are these frigates. So other than that, there's not too much to write home about with their navy, but those cruisers are very potent. So let's do a tour of the planets. I guess the best way to do this is to just start clicking through the units. So go through all the space units first. First up, we've got our troops on Holy Terra. We've got another transport ship, plus a nobleman and a banker. So the nobleman is something else he's rejiggered. He's made each, most recently actually in the 3.4 version of the mod, he's gotten rid of the noble heirs and noble lords and made it so that each house has unique noble units. And then there's a generic nobleman for imperial type. Like if you take control of the fleet or the Stigmata garrison, their nobles are different as well. And so the Al Malik nobles are weaker in combat overall, but they provide significantly more money than the nobles of the other houses. Whereas the Hazat and like all the other noblemen sort of have different advantages that correspond to their house. The Hazat are quite powerful in close combat and so on and so forth. But for first turn on here, because I don't really care that much about keeping anybody on Terra, I'm going to load them onto the ship and launch. And then click next, and we'll just sentry him and make him go away. Byzantium. This is where I guess we're coming across the first of Al Malik's unique units, and they have a couple of cool ones. The first is these, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, Mutashis Secret Police, who have quite a high spot value and a reasonably high camouflage value as well. They're also good in close combat, which is useful. But they're a pretty decent covert unit, and the nice thing about these guys is they should, I believe, be able to fight on Byzantium before somebody declares themselves regent. So they should, I believe, and I'm sure Brian will correct me on this, but they should be able to fight on Byzantium before it's sort of open season there. Other than that, muster sentries are a fairly standard mercenary unit. Mercury's is already seen, they're just a transport. The Urkai Elite are interesting. High psychic. They're very good combat units, lightly armored, but very good in combat, and a reasonably high spot in camouflage as well. So they can, if you include a couple of them in your army, it can really kind of make your enemy underestimate how powerful you are, or how powerful a given stack is. Another nobleman, the bankers, these guys are just a resource generating unit. Feudal knights, which you can kind of use as an additional general. They're not as good as the noblemen, but they do help out. They count as officers. Trebuchets, which are just planetary defense units that kind of everybody has. The trebuchets are the weakest and easiest of the planetary defense units to make. Crystal Lantern Dancers are quite interesting as well. They are not the most powerful of the special units, but they do have a very high camouflage value and a high spot. They also have an air attack, and that can be quite useful. So something to keep in mind. Compared to some of the other houses' unique units, they're not as good in a stand-up fight, but they're still definitely powerful. Weaponsmith is just another resource generator, and then the anti-air, anti-tank, artillery, and stuff is just junk. I'm going to leave it on Byzantium too for now, just to sort of fill out the garrison, but don't expect any of these things to stand up in a serious fight. They're pretty sad. But for now, we're going to leave our noblemen in place on Byzantium too, because if you take them off Byzantium 2, you can't vote, so you need to leave a nobleman on there. One strategy you may want to consider is finding someplace nice and remote, because the nobleman just has to be on Byzantium to count. So one strategy, especially if you're worried about the covert war, is to find a nice remote little island somewhere and plunk them down on there and just have them sit there instead of in the fort, or the castles now that they've been renamed, in these castles, which is where everybody kind of expects the nobleman to be. So why don't we do that? We'll select him. We'll select our Mercury. We'll load him on there. Plunk. Launch. Land. Let's find a good spot to put him. So my ship will take damage for doing this, but getting him like somewhere safer is never a bad idea. I'm going to put him on this little island down here. Unload him. Exit. So, other than that, on Byzantium, don't have too much excitement, so just skip over the rest of those units for now. Only other holding we have on Byzantium is this rather useless chemical factory. You can't get the resources to produce chemicals here. Like, you need to have metal, energy, and trace in order to produce chemicals, and because we've got Universal Warehouse turned off, we can't draw from other planets like other planets that we control. So it just kind of sits here and is thoroughly useless, for our purposes at least. And then we've got an Arborium. The Arborium is useful because the Arborium continues to produce food to feed the units that you have on planet. And we do also have a backup nobleman here, which is useful as well. Not a terrible idea to drop a couple of spies or something like that in on this Arborium just to help try and keep him safe as well. But after that, we're kind of done on Byzantium. And Virilya, only thing to do here, pull the nobleman off. And may as well snag the feudal knight as well. If you want to, you can build some levies just to have something there, but really your holding on Viral Ya is not going to do a whole heck of a lot. And then you can start sending him back up towards Al Malik's space. Once again, though, remember, you are going to be going through, in this case, Ducado's territory, so make sure you ask for permission first. But because I'm playing against the AI, not much point in doing that, so we'll just send him along. This is another relatively useless planet. It has potential because Demole is right by your territory. It's right by Elion here. So it has potential to turn it in, to do something with it. But for the most part, it's too far removed from any of the other planets. It's potentially a good staging ground if you want to go to war with Ducados. But other than that, it's too remote. It's a long way from, like, it's 1, 2, 3 jumps from Byzantium, which is where most of the excitement ends up taking place. And so, unless you're planning on fighting Ducados, it's not the most useful of holdings to have, but it still produces a few resources, some couple of units on it. Don't even have a ship here, though, but you will notice that there is a nobleman who you can probably try to get off. Actually, might not be the worst idea in the world to send that ship down there just to pick him up next turn. Move him somewhere else. But other than that, just group them and skip them. Group them and skip them. Okay, so Elion, we're now on the first of our actual planets. And so on Elion, we have a fairly undeveloped planet, which kind of sucks. It has a mine on it that produces gems, which is good. Right here. So this is an important mine to keep safe. You've got the gems there. But other than that, there's not a whole heck of a lot going on here. You've got a starport, a shield, and a palace. What I would suggest doing is try to get a factory built on here, and you can use this to turn out engineers or to turn out more starports, things like that. But for the most part, this is a planet that you can kind of not pay a massive amount of attention to, just periodically send something here to pick up gems. The one thing that it is useful for is because of the shield. Because once you research economics, there are some unique units that can be recruited from shields. Especially units like spies and assassins and nasty stuff like that. So it's something to keep in mind for that. But it'd take a lot of effort to turn Elion into a major production planet, which is a little bit of a pity because it does have good resources. You've got trace, you've got metal, you've got energy, food, all that sort of stuff. So you could turn this into a significant sort of secondary power base, but as it stands right now, it's quite underdeveloped. It'll take a while for it to get up and going. So early game, at least, you can pretty much ignore it. Now, one thing to pay attention to on Elion is, as Al Malik, down in this corner of the map here, there's a farm and an arboreum surrounded by a whole bunch of church structures. The Arboreum's moderately well defended, but there's also a fairly major rebel problem here. I quite regularly have rebels spawning out of this general direction that can cause some significant problems. So it's up to you if you want to try and defend these two locations or just kind of give them up. Because if the church ever declares war on the rebels and the rebels have taken these, then the church takes them, and unless you want to declare war on the church, you kind of got to give them up for lost. They do have another farm here that'll at least provide enough food to keep your people fed. And yeah, another farm there, and I believe there's one more there. So the planet's not going to starve, even if you lose those two. It's harvesting 349 and eating 178. So even if you lose those two, it's not the end of the world. Just a matter of what you consider to be most important. Personally, I think these two might be a bit more trouble than they're worth, but it's up to you if you want to try and hang on to them. And of course, eventually you'll stomp the rebels out of everywhere. So we'll just click through Aelion here. Since I'm here, I'll just disband one of these arties. Don't need two. They do, however, on here have some of these Ukar mercenaries who are quite powerful. Weakly armored, but fairly capable combatants. Sorry, just grabbing a drink. And so those are some units you might want to pull and put somewhere else, which shouldn't be too hard to do. It just take a couple turns because they're, other than the one little escort frigate that I sent down towards Demole, there aren't any ships around Aelion. But it's something to consider as you're sort of shuffling units around, is to do something with them. Other than that, disband one of these anti-tanks. And disband that anti-air. I think pretty much everything else can kind of get left as is. You're going to want to get some more reinforcements to this mine because you don't want to lose that, which, because on account of the gems, but it's shouldn't get attacked right away, and if it does, it's not too difficult to retake. It just means you lose the gem production for a little while, but just so you know, if that mine does get captured, you should prioritize retaking it. Depends a lot on what the rebels decide to do, though. Okay, so in the core forces for the planet, you got a couple of these secret police guys, some of these Dark Legion Ukar mercenaries, Noble. These Mantu Irregulars are very interesting. They have a very high spot and a very strong psychic attack. Makes them very... It gives them a lot of potential. It wouldn't put more than one or two in a stack, but they can really help your stacks from getting surprised by... You move in to attack somebody and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, there's 5 times the number of units that I thought they had there. So they're useful for that, and I mean, strength 80 psychic attack is nothing to sneeze at either. Then just economic units, does have an architect. Mastiff is an assault tank, fairly generic. Hover tank, tank destroyer, and then a bunch of junk. The hover tank is a pretty decent unit, but you do only have one of them, so limited overall utility. For now, though, since we're here, I'm going to snag this architect, move him down beside the palace here, and because there aren't any other gem deposits that exist on here, we are just going to build a lab.
Unit spotted.
Don't want to move everybody out of the palace. That was a misclick. So in the lab, we will right-click on it, go to Tech, and this lab's only researching 40, so this one would actually make sense to put into the psychosociology, because it's a brand new lab. We'll put it into the psychosociology. We'll only be wasting 10 points that way, so research that up. I think that's the Grand Tour of Aelion. We do have a nice planetary defense cannon, but other than that, there's not much to write home about here. Can kind of ignore that planet for the most part. Now, Krikorum is much more interesting, and I know I'm mispronouncing it, but yeah, deal. Krikorum is your gateway to Byzantium 2, so it's a very important planet. Unfortunately, somewhat underdeveloped. It does not have a factory, which hurts it a lot. But it does have a starport, and it's got a fairly good resource base here. You can build chemicals, ceramosteel, and it has the resources to build both of those. It has the metal to energy the trace for the chemicals, and it has the energy, it will have the chemicals and the metal to build the ceramosteel. So this can end up turning into a very good production planet. Even if you wanted to go up the biochem route here, it does not have exotica, is the only downside. There is, I believe, yes, an exotica deposit here. So that's a pretty good spot to consider building another farm, is right around here, just to collect those exotica. And then you can go up the biochem and into the wetware route. And then it does have everything you need for electronics. But the way this planet's set up, with the addition of one farm, you have everything you need to build some of the most advanced units in the game once you unlock them. So this can turn into a very, very good factory planet, which is wonderful just because of how close it is to Byzantium. Of course, that means that if you can reach Byzantium in one turn, anybody who's around Byzantium can reach Krikorum in one turn, which is, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but still very, very good. And one of the suggestions that Brian has had is to actually focus all of your production on a single planet. And if that's the case, I'd almost say go for Krikorum. It has the resources that you need. It has not much of a rebel problem. There's like a few ruins scattered around, but it should be a rebel problem that you can handle fairly easily. And it's so beautifully located. I mean, from here you can reach the Halan space, you can reach Ducato space, you can reach Hawkwood space, you can pull units back. It's only 2 jumps away from Stigmata. The only downside to using Krikorum as basically your capital is it does leave Ishtar quite weak, and Ishtar is a good planet as well. Of the 4, Ishtar and Krikorum definitely have the most potential. Anyhow, as for the actual units that you have on Krikorum, you have this scholar, who I assume represents something in Emperor of the Fading Sun's lore, but really all that matters is he's got a reasonably good psychic attack, and he gives you money every turn, which, hey, bonus. Can disband one of the... Oh, no, we don't want to disband that. Come on, select... There we go. Disband the anti-tank. And yeah, so I'm assuming that these guys are some wandering... I don't know what they are, but there's something from the Emperor of the Fading Sun's lore that, for the purposes of the game, just gives you a bit of money. Got another nobleman here, and when I've played before, he seems to be perfectly fine now. This particular mine has never been attacked by rebels, so I've just left him be, and it's worked out okay. Good to remember that he's there in case you need a general, but other than that, he can just sort of chill. Another one of those scholar guys, I believe. Um, this farm does get attacked. There are rebels kicking around up here that will take this farm, so you can disband one of them if you want or not. It doesn't really matter. And just move them. Not sure, move them down to that farm. And here, this is a new guy. Oh, an assassin. Okay, so this is the lab on Croccorum. This is a newer edition, but it's got an assassin who, right now, I'm going to be using to move towards the city because I want to get him in onto Byzantium as quick as I can. The assassins are genetic engineered assassin. This guy's crazy powerful. Close combat strength of 100, 10 spot, 10 camouflage. He's fantastic. Or she, judging by the picture. Yeah, it looks more like a she. But anyhow, scientist is just a resource generating unit. You can kind of ignore him. But I'm going to start him running up towards my main base there. And we also have a gem deposit here, so Croccorum really does have everything you could want on a planet. Except for that. The shield and the factory are the only things that it's missing. Okay. Now, on Croccorum, the one builder unit we start with is these slave labor here. They can build cities, but they do earn you 200 Firebirds per turn, which is nice. And so I'm going to... But at the beginning of the game, getting that gem production up and going is more important. So I'm going to go snag my transport here. I actually had a transport there, but yeah, this works too. Snag my slave labor, move them in, drop in the Hazard. Unload him. Does he count as a lander? Because it doesn't look like he took any damage. Maybe he does. That's handy. And build a mine. So now I'm going to start collecting gems from there, which is wonderful. Getting that defended will be important, but should be able to last a turn or two until I can... Well, I guess I could probably get some stuff down. Dispossessed. These guys... It's new artwork, at least. They've been around for a while, but they're sort of a mediocre, averagey type. Slightly better than average infantry. So I'll snag one of them. That's the downside with these hazards, is it looks like they can only transport one unit, but... And unload him. Just so there's some defenses in there. Okay. Other than that, not too much we haven't already seen on Croccorum. And I am coming up on 40 minutes here, so I'm going to quickly go through the rest of the stuff. Another nobleman there. Gwyneth is a Hawkwood planet. You've got a nobleman on there. So just getting him pulled off soon-ish generally not a priority unless you're expecting Hawkwood to attack you. It's going to take a couple turns to get anything there anyhow. Oh no, I guess he is only one jump away. So you could ask permission and send a ship up to pick your nobleman up, if you feel so inclined. Remembering, of course, that you can't rebuild noblemen, but you'd want to be asking permission to do that anyhow. Isktar, the capital. So Isktar is another really good planet. You need to watch these southern cities. They tend to get attacked by rebels, but there's also not anything too critical in any of them. You've got a nobleman here, so usually what you can do to keep him safe is move him onto that ship. The rebels don't have anything that can attack a ship, and you can just cruise him off and have him picked up elsewhere, should you feel so inclined. Got another nobleman here. This farm, for me, has never been attacked, so he's fairly safe there. If you want to pull him back, you can, and he should just be able to walk it. It'll take him 2 turns. He'll dip across the map here. Now, on Ishtar, and one of the reasons why it is a wonderful planet is because it controls 2 agoras. Agoras are normally only available to the League. They're all green. They're controlled by the League. But in the agoras, you can build some cool units. Particularly, you can build the Reeves Guild Bankers and the Charioteer Bureaucrats. Now, they require some rare resources is the only downside. You can also build the Muster Sentries, which are a really good unit to have in the early game. Now the downside is all of these cost gems, except for the Peasant Serfs. You don't need to pay them in diamonds. Everybody else wants diamonds though, or in the case of the Charioteer Bureaucrat, he wants Monopolis, which is just as, if not more valuable than gems are. Now, the nice thing is he gives you 500 gold per turn. And if you're not using those gems for anything else, that can be really, really good. But, and I haven't played far enough in to see what else unlocks in the Agoras after you've teched up a bit, but I'm assuming you can probably get some pretty cool units out of them. It'll be expensive, but you can do it. Now, one of the nice things is, on Ishtar, is you do have a mine with 2 sources of gems, which makes this an insanely valuable mine, actually. It's got metal, trace, and gems. 2 metal, 1 trace, and 2 gems. So this mine is a wonderful place. Other than that, you've got your 2 labs there, your palace, factory, which is nice as well. I would say Ishtar is a better planet overall than Krikorum. It's definitely better developed, but the downside is it is quite remote. And almost what I'd suggest doing is split your focus between Krikorum and Ishtar. Ishtar to hold off the symbiotes, Krikorum to push against the other noble houses. Excuse me, another drink. Just because otherwise, like if you put everything on Krikorum, then Ishtar might fall to the symbiotes. And if you put everything in Ishtar, it's too remote to really project your power. Like, if you look at it, you need to jump to Aelion, then to Krikorum, then to Byzantium. So it's a fair number of jumps away. It does have a nice lead into Ducato's territory if you ever feel like picking a fight with them. But of course that means that they also have a connection to your home planet, which is less than ideal. And of course there's the symbiotes. Another nobleman here. Again, I've never had any issues with rebels around this well. It's really just been this southern coast here that has caused problems with rebels. So you can leave that nobleman be. In here, you have some of these mercs and another nobleman. may as well pull them off. And heck, pull the banker too. And ship this transport off towards here and center them up in your capital. Just safer there. Got a guild factory there. If you ever end up going to war with the guild, that's a nice little prize to pick up. And then the factory here, I can't remember, did I build a... I did start building the cargo plane, perfect. So yeah, that's a nice planet too. It's so remote, it causes problems. Skip through. Other than that, you've got a spy, who's sort of a mediocre version of that assassin, and an architect, who we are going to use. There's no other real useful things to build immediately. There's no other gem deposits that have been found. There may be more, might have added more, I'm not sure, but for now, we will go and build another lab. And now, since I've got everything sort of sorted out as far as the tech goes, I'm going to start this guy researching applied technology. Applied technology is useful if you want the tech that you research to actually do anything. So it's a good one to at least get opened up fairly early on. And there's no point in building more like dumping more points into something than you need to. Okay, so other than that, no other units that we haven't already seen before. We got more of those Crystal Lantern Dancers and more of those Urkai Mercenaries, 5th Dark Legion or whatever. And these are just resource generating units, the prostitutes and courtiers and actors. Adds more flavor to Al Malik, but that's kind of all they're there for. Pandemonium is a Ducatos planet, and the downside to this is your farm is very vulnerable. Like, if he decides he wants to take you out, it's not too hard. So recommend getting your nobleman off there sooner rather than later. And Rampart is a Lihalan planet that you can kind of do the same on. I mean, the nice thing about this here is it's actually got a reasonable force. It could put up a bit of a scrap. Infantry's quite useless, but nobleman, knight, some artillery. Okay, and the last planet, Sharput. Sharput is another one of those planets that has a lot of potential. Has a factory. Has a big-time rebel problem, though. It actually has 2 factories. There's one here, and there's one over here. And I just need to pause it for half a sec here. I think my dog needs to go out. I'll be right back. And we're back. Sorry about that. So, like I was saying, Sharput is a good planet to support Gricorum from. It has a pretty good industrial base, and it does produce electronics, so until you get an electronics plant up and running on Gricorum, you can always export electronics from Sharput to Gricorum, which is a very viable thing to do since they're only one jump away from each other. Now, they have some rebels up here. There's a rebel-controlled mine here, which also has access to gems, so taking that as a definite priority. And other than that, we've got some nice ruins to take here, and there are some ruins down in the south here by your other factory that can be useful to take. Also got a castle here to help project power that way. But other than that, there's not too much to say about Aileron. It does border symbiote space, so it's important to keep it defended. but it can hold its own fairly well. Now, this architect unit here, I would suggest actually plunking him down right here, because you see there's the 2 metal deposits. That'll send Krikorum's or Aileron's, oh god, Sharput's metal production through the roof. It makes it a much more viable industrial planet, and really lets you crank up production, especially with the 2 factories. You can turn out a lot of tanks from here. So especially if you want to make a move into symbiote space, Sharput is a good place to do that from. Other than that, you got a starport and not much else. So I think I've kind of covered the basics of what Al Malik's starting position is like, and it's taken me almost an hour, longer than I figured it would. I'm going to put a cut in here, and I'll probably do some of the first turn busy work that I did in the first video, building peasants and airplanes and stuff like that off camera, and then see you guys next time. I'll probably continue this particular one through to the mid game, where you've got what kind of units am I thinking? The mercenaries and stuff like that. But I'll probably return to them after I've done the intro videos for the other factions. So until next time, I will see you then, and happy conquering of the galaxy. Cheers.